Hi, and welcome to this episode of China XYZ. I'm Guo Yiming. Today, we'll delve into the Belt and Road Initiative and discover how it has evolved over the past decade and what impact has it brought to global trade, infrastructure, as well as people-to-people ties. So joining us today are Mr. Einar Tangen, Senior Fellow at Taihe Institute and Chairman of Asian Narratives. Welcome. Zun Ahmad Khan, a Research Fellow at the Center for China and Globalization. Welcome. And also we have Jean-Paul Lachabelle, a graduate student at Ancient Academy of Peking University. Thank you all for joining us today. This year marks the 10th anniversary of the Belt and Road Initiative. So before we kick off, let's take a little trip down the memory lane. So when you first heard about the Belt and Road Initiative a decade ago, has your views shifted? Would you like to start, Jean-Paul?
Sure, I'd love to. I think one of the things, and maybe one of the big themes that I have gained out of learning things about the BRI is just that I think when I first heard about it, it seemed like this centrally directed sort of program that was, all the work of the central government. But I think as I've come to learn more, it's really the result of individual entrepreneurs in China, individual companies, SOEs, and they're all just doing what companies do, which is, investing in other places and building things. And so I think the fact that it's not so centrally directed is one big takeaway that I've gained in recent years.
About you?
Yeah, I think I do completely. I first came across the Belt and Road Initiative when I was a researcher in Pakistan. And of course, the concept that especially infrastructure development, something that not only my country but many developing countries really needed, was very positive. And I think that was my first exposure. But it was really when in 2015, a few months before I came to Beijing for the first time, that the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor was announced, which is the bilateral manifestation of BRI in Pakistan, between China and Pakistan, that what this really means, hit me. And 210 million Pakistanis at that time. So the first phase of the projects was $46 billion proposal of infrastructure, namely initially energy, transportation, also special economic zones, and the port of Gwadar. Now, this was infrastructure that Pakistan desperately needed for many years. We were going through one of the worst economic crises that our country had ever experienced. Like, we had 10 to 12 hours of power shortages in major cities. We were deindustrializing because of the dearth of infrastructure. So the announcement of CPEC was, I think it's hard to explain to someone who hasn't been in that situation what it felt like to Pakistanis, from policymakers to ordinary people. It was like a breath of fresh air for an economy that needed it desperately. So I think firstly, for me, then onwards, the BRI is, in a way, I would say, maybe a positive affirmative action, realizing that there is a big infrastructure gap. There is a big demand in developing countries in particular to build their infrastructure, and the traditional institutions that were previously interested in such investments were not able to fill that gap. And moving forward, I think over these years, we saw that this initiative has evolved. It is receptive to changing circumstances. By 2017-18, we were talking about socioeconomic dimension of the BRI and CPEC. And now, we have other dimensions like people-to-people exchanges. We have academic, scientific exchanges as well. So in 10 years, I think the BRI really stands for problem solving, and how China and host countries, partner countries and regions, first they identify collectively, it's mutually determined, and it will keep evolving.
How about you, Einar? Have your views evolved?
I've been involved in economic development for a long period of time, basically most of my adult career. I was chairman of my state's International Trade Council, things like that. So I knew a lot of people in the bureaucracy, State Department, et cetera. And I remember the reaction to it, and it was, ambitious slogan, China's never going to get this done. What are they thinking? We've been doing this for a long period of time. They should be learning from us. When you have a lot of criticism out there of countries, especially in the US, they were poo-pooing this a lot. They're just telling me, Einar, this is dream stuff, and this is just stuff they're saying in order to make it look like China's trying to help. I said, no, I think they actually are. And they have a better record of completing their projects than we do. So you should keep an eye on this. And they still today are still trying to say it's a bad thing.
I think they're the only ones buying their propaganda.
Well, no, but you know, it's interesting. I mean, the China model isn't that they're going to copy China, all right? But what they can do is learn from it, and especially this idea that you start with nothing and you go there. So they no longer have to. Belt and Road projects are no longer something where you go and you have to negotiate with Beijing about how you're going to run your country. So, by all accounts, it started out everyone was in doubt. Today, I don't think at least 3/4 of the world are not in doubt.
Pakistan is a key partner of the BRI, and from first-hand experience, how has the BRI has impacted Pakistan's economic landscape and perhaps people's lives?
As I mentioned in my previous comment, that the first phase was about hard infrastructure, which Pakistan desperately needed at that time. The projects that were announced were actually envisioned and to a great extent already planned by Pakistan as part of our Vision 2025 at that time. But we just didn't have the resources to, to execute those projects, and nobody was interested in investing. So the first thing, that was very important about CPEC is that it was mutually determined between the NDRC of China and the Planning and Development Commission of Pakistan. Now, after the first phase, when even in the first Belt and Road Forum in 2017, we had 22 major infrastructure projects that were exhibited as very successful models of the major infrastructure, which was the part of Belt and Road Vision. We started focusing on socioeconomic development. Interestingly, it was prior to that the small and beautiful projects that we're talking about today had already begun. So there were different schools that major companies, major CPEC companies that were building, the energy projects and even the Port of Gwadar, they had already invested in communities that they were a part of by that time. One very popular example in Pakistan is the Fakir Colony School, which I was lucky to visit in 2017. It was basically land donated by a local family, and then the Chinese company investing in one of the best schools now of Balochistan. The reason they invested in that school was because the dropout rate of young girls in that community was very high when they moved to middle school. And that's because the distance of the school was seen as unfeasible for the local families. Since that school has been opened, the quality of education in the city has improved. Even people, from other parts prefer to go to the Fakir Colony School. And I think there are a lot of stories in Chinese media as well about this school. This is a very positive example. Similarly, there were a hospital was under construction, which had the kind of facilities that were just not available to Gwadar. And when I went 2 months later, the hospital was almost complete, and it was going to be inaugurated officially shortly after. The speed is what I'm saying was just unfathomable. Other projects that just in Gwadar in particular they've started are women empowerment, employing women, different a foundation specifically to train women in different skills, and then they're able to make a living for themselves. They have also invested in livestock, this kind of livestock farming for the local community, which didn't exist. People who were fishermen on broken boats, and this was a big issue in Gwadar because Gwadar is also a fishing village initially, right? They were provided with modern boats, they were provided with modern equipment and trainings, and now their circumstances have transformed. So it was really, when we talk about about officially introducing a socioeconomic dimension, it was years prior to that when those companies had started the projects that they were already investing in these initiatives. So these are some of the key examples. And the impact, of course, we quote that it's almost 200,000 direct jobs that are linked with the China-Pakistan economic corridor. But the indirect job opportunities that are coming out of it are still being counted by the government. They could go up to 500,000 or 1 million. We also have a lot of Pakistanis that are receiving top quality education through scholarships in China and then going back to Pakistan and contributing, becoming, a better part of the workforce that Pakistan needs to invest in to be able to utilize the infrastructure. And another very key aspect, is the investment in agriculture development, because Pakistan is essentially an agricultural agriculture-oriented country. That's our biggest export as well. But we don't have modern agriculture. Our yields are very low. So over the years, China has invested a lot in small farming communities and to modernize Pakistan's agriculture practices. Even during COVID, the progress on that was, ongoing. And technical vocational education, China has opened different institutes in Pakistan. China is partnering with different provincial level, centers that are providing technical and vocational education, investing in the resources, and also taking students in China, especially Luban is a very good example. So the investment in communities has been ongoing in the last 8 years in particular. And you see that, in Pakistan, you have countless people that have benefited from CPEC, and there's an absolute consensus for this reason that we need to expand this cooperation. And how do we further expand this cooperation? How do we, really uplift people out of poverty without, not with that old mindset that we'll need to just, give stipends to a community? How can we empower a community really? And that's also where China comes in. So China is creating, I guess, a different perspective, a different vision, a different outlook on how developing countries can move forward.
Yeah, it's really inspiring to hear that there are so many lesser known projects going on in Pakistan. So, Jamho, you've looked into a lot of projects that China has been invested in the BRI countries. Are there any specific projects that impress you most?
I think I love trains, and so this won't be anything new based on what's said already, but I do think like the most impressive thing to me about BRI investment really is the infrastructure development. And I do think that ultimately, I don't think it's worth sort of decoupling that from an understanding of Chinese domestic sort of economic situation, which is that obviously there is an overcapacity situation in China, and so it makes a lot of sense for companies who have really excelled at creating airports, at creating trains, at creating roads, bridges, to take their expertise abroad and sell that expertise to other countries. And so I'm particularly excited, by things like the North-South corridor, getting train lines all the way through Russia, Kazakhstan, and further south. But yeah, I think that's mostly just my perspective on the necessity of infrastructure development in a lot of the world, where, as we've already talked about, those are places that do often get passed up by the World Bank and other organizations.
So as you said, that Belt and Road Initiative is more about infrastructure and trade. It's more about bringing opportunities and bringing people together. So have you seen such cultural and people-to-people exchanges taking place because of the BRI projects? And how does it affect the broader economic and political dynamics of participating countries?
Yeah.
Well, you can see it statistically. The number of people from the global south who are now enrolling in Chinese universities. From the Middle East, from Africa, from South America, from ASEAN, has dramatically increased. The educational part is the most important part, but one of the big sea changes is when you have a multilateral world, right? In the past, you needed to know about the US, you need to know about your neighbors and your own country. Today, because globalization touches everybody, literally, in the world, unless they're living by themselves, you have to know more about every country. And this applies to China as well. China knows so little about even countries on its border. India and China, big gulf. Everybody likes each other, but they don't know how to deal with each other. So, it goes beyond language. Chinese people need to know about all of the countries that they're dealing with, down to the level of their culture, their literature, legal systems, political systems, the resources that they have, and including understanding the daily routines and pace of life You need to have an understanding of that in order to do business with somebody.
Over Guoqingjie, I was traveling to Tashkent to visit Uzbekistan, and we saw in the airport a woman who was going to meet her husband, who works there, who works as part of a Chinese firm that's in Uzbekistan, and she was taking her son with her. And I think like things like that are also exactly what you're talking about. These sort of like learning how to do business, learning how to be in another country. It happens so much easier when you're there, as opposed to sort of like from an abstract perspective, or just learning the language, for instance. And so I think those like instances like that are really important. Like I think, in a lot of ways, it has been variously described by different narratives, right? Like China sending workers abroad has been seen as both a positive and a negative in certain lights. But I think one of the really, really important and like unequivocally good things about it is that you build these strong sort of understandings of how business works in other countries. You build strong people-to-people connections, right? Like you make friends of other nationalities, which I think is just a really, really important thing to do in a globalized world.
I think, one of the aspects about, obviously you can talk about investment and hard infrastructure and all of that, but really in the end it is about the willingness of normal people to, look for opportunities in each other's countries. I think awareness is a very important factor as well. So say 15 years ago, when the number of foreign students or foreigners working in China was much lower than it is today, the awareness of opportunities in China and from China to those countries was less, right? So just having more people, more people being able to interact with one another, more people understanding the culture, the Chinese culture even for that matter, if there are students based in China, it is opening doors, it is creating awareness. So our surrounding, the more we expand opportunities within our surrounding or our exposure, the more we are able to explore what lies beyond. And I think that's literally what's happening. Another factor is that, countries that are seen as attractive destinations or whose culture is in particular very well understood by Chinese people also end up being countries that benefit more from business collaborations and investments. So this is something that many developing countries are now working on. How can we showcase our culture to the Chinese people? Should we maybe attract some even KOLs, to our country and see if they can intrigue more Chinese people to come and explore. And once you have that, interest in another country, you will find opportunities. You'll find things to work on together. A very important aspect that Einar mentioned right now was this multipolarizing world. And 20 years ago, not so many people in parts of Asia, especially South and West of Asia. I think ASEAN is a very positive exception in Asia. But South and West of Asia, the Middle East, or the African continent, when they thought about globalization or expanding their horizons or exporting, they would usually think Europe, the US, limited options. If they thought about better education, they would again think only North. But now, with increasing, multilateral interactions, with, especially because of the BRI, many more opportunities for people from other countries to come together and explore, what can another country offer? So when these delegations of, dozens of countries are meeting in China, or when you have the CIFTIS or the CIIE or the Belt and Road Summit, it is not just everyone looking at what can we do with China. That is the central theme. But on the side, there are countries within the African continent or South Asians meeting with, other people from other countries thinking, okay, this is what we can work on with each other as well. So I think one of the key factors that the BRI is doing is increasing the possibility of these opportunities for people to interact and then to take it from there. So this is your first point, right? Like when you said that the BRI has a lot to do with people, normal businessmen, people interested in cultural work, academics, scientists, all of them become part of pursuing the next step once they have exposure. So people to people, connectivity, empathy, friendship is very critical for better business collaborations, for development, for all of that.
So as we reflect on a decade of BRI development, how do you see it heading in the next chapter? What are some of the specific areas you think that should be prioritized?
I hope that the the remaining 25% of the world sort of signs on. I struggle to see it happening. I think that my big hope for the BRI is that it moves away maybe from being something that's like a narrative-driven sort of project, and I think that like the West, but also China, could do some work towards this. I think there's a lot of ways in which, for instance, like the emphasis on win-win cooperation and the emphasis on it being sort of like only a good thing in China versus the emphasis on it being like totally negative and simply a power grab in the West. I think these are both ways in which we sort of do the project a disservice by pretending that a project like it can be so black and white. I think takes out a lot of the sort of the nuance to any single development project. And I think we should treat development projects as singular projects, right? Like I think it's totally valid to critique times when it goes wrong, and it's totally valid to be really happy when it goes right, which seems to be like a lot of the time. And so I think yeah, I really think that the narrative thing should be left behind. I think it's totally valid to call it a project, call it the BRI, and it's great to have a name, a moniker for it. But at the same time, I think it has led to like a lot of concerns, I think, in the West, that it is sort of a soft power play, or that it's in some way trying to destabilize the West. And so I think like honestly, like more effective messaging by the Chinese government might help alleviate some of those fears as well. And so, I'm not saying that it's China's responsibility to make everybody in the West feel good about themselves, but I do think like everybody could do a little bit better with the messaging, and I think it would make it so that like people are more interested in signing on to the project, and it would also make it so that the news isn't quite, or just so dichotomous. Like it's either bad or it's good. There's no just like sort of nuanced perception of it, which I think would be really important moving forward.
And in these 10 years, I think one other thing that we've learned is that there has to be a greater sense of ownership within developing countries. Yes, China has success in China, but there are so many places, parts of China, that just came out of poverty, right? So not every region was successful, boom, in the beginning of the reform and opening up. Many regions have faced different kinds of challenges. Every city, every village, every province is a unique story. And China and Chinese people and the government, they're constantly seeking solutions. That's the kind of mindset that more developing countries need. Just because China has Shenzhen does not mean Gwadar will become Shenzhen like that. It won't. It took 40 years. You cannot go to Gwadar after 5 years and expect skyscrapers and everything transformed. People have to be creative on the ground, study themselves. And I think my expectation is, firstly, that this important message, this realization will become stronger. This is a very important message that so many delegations of bureaucrats, of academics, etc., are being brought to China to see exactly this. The success so far is the result of hard work. It's not inevitable. No success is inevitable. This is important. And the second is multilateral development. The multilateralization of BRI is very important. We have seen over the last 2-3 years the focus on China, Central Asia, China, Africa, China, South Asia, instead of just bilateral, multilateral. Because if you want to think about global shared future, first at least start with regional. So the multilateralization of the BRI is also something I hope and I expect we'll see more of.
What's your take, Einar?
I agree with the points you made. I do think that China has a great story. They need to toughen up. There's always going to be detractors, right? So 3/4 of the world agrees with you. There's always going to be some percentage who doesn't. And don't worry about them. They are not. They're not the majority. They're simply people who are bitter, and you're not going to change their mind. So don't bother. China needs to keep its story up front and stop worrying about criticism. You have the greatest story there is. What more can you ask for? A better story? I mean, come on.
No.
The story isn't going to change. So, yeah, I do agree on the message. On the other side, seeing the Belt and Road Initiative by itself, I think is incorrect. It is, and you've alluded to this, it's about security of countries. It is about development, and it's about sovereignty. And this is what countries want. And there has to be a global sense that there is some common destiny that can be embraced by different people. I mean, they go back to this Confucius saying that, harmony is not about
Uniformity.
Conformity. It is about understanding. And that's why, we've been talking about how important it is for Chinese people to understand all of the different groups that are dealing with. And even the other countries that don't agree with you, you still need to understand them. And they need to understand you. So that is the essential part of creating harmony is first education and understanding. But then embracing, I don't know anybody who says, I don't want my country to be secure. I don't want to have development and have a better life that I can offer everybody. And certainly I want all of our decisions made in some far off capital. No one says that. So if those can be embraced, the Belt and Road Initiative is really about how you deliver some of these things, some of the mechanical parts. But there has to be a sense. So first, proving over a 10-year period that you can create good things. Second, suggesting a framework that can be embraced by everybody, regardless of their differences, is the next step. And then overall, believing that, we're all in the same boat. We need to start rowing together. Climate change isn't going to, go away by itself. And we have other issues between debt and development and things like this. So, let's hope that it can get a little bit better. As I said, we always have doubts, but let's be optimistic.
Together for a shared future.
Yes.
And this brings us to the end of today's conversation. It's clear that the Belt and Road Initiative is not just an infrastructure project, but a multifaceted initiative aiming at fostering a shared future. Looking back at the past decade, we see a world growing more connected, and it gives us hope for stronger and closer collaborations forward. Thanks again for tuning in for this episode of China XYZ. See you next time.
And thank you for having us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Kudos for everyone.
Thank you.